Right, good morning. This is episode 4, I believe, of the Perspective Podcast, the show where everything's made up and the points don't matter. So today I'm going to share some perspectives from an author. His name is Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. He was very famous. He's won the Nobel Prize, I think, as well. And I'll give you a bit of background if you don't know who he is. And then also I'll give you a practical example, so something that you can take from that and something that I do that I find to be some way of maintaining inspiration in your life. The reason why I say that is that we're so bombarded by information that almost on an unconscious level that we don't have much control over. And realizing that you have control and power is in itself life affirming and inspirational, I think. So a little bit about Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. I'll put his book and his link down here. Interesting guy. He essentially was a big proponent of the Marxist sort of regime, and I'm not criticizing this. It's not a political observation here. It's really just more about the man and what he did that I find inspiring. Was he was in that position. He was decorated soldier in pretty much wars since about 1930, if I'm not mistaken. In World War II, he received commendations and stuff. And then he wrote a letter. He came to some realization that the system was corrupt. And he wrote a letter to one of his friends, a private letter, which was discovered, which was criticizing Stalin. And in essence, he was detained, captured by the state, and then put into a concentration camp, essentially, which was called the Gulag. I don't know if I pronounce that right, but he wrote a book about that experience called the Gulag Archipelago, which has probably sold like over 10 million copies or something now. It's just been a fascinating account of his life experiences. And the one thing that I found most inspirational about his story, which is incredibly complex in some ways, but also incredibly simple, it's more to do with what he actually did when he was in the Gulag. And so here's what happened when he goes into the Gulag. He went through a great period of self-reflection, and he was in very difficult circumstances. And more than that, he realized that there was power in his thoughts, in being able to reflect and capture his thoughts. But there was one problem. He was devoid of everything. He didn't have a pen and paper to write down his thoughts even, right? And so he was basically naked as they came. He had nothing. But he had his spirit and a desire to move forward. And he did that. He did that by essentially creating and memorizing a number of very long poems. The technique he used, I don't know how he came about it, but it was something along the lines of a rosary maybe. And there's some learning in that you can essentially program yourself in a positive way if you have a similar, or if you have a thought about how you would do that without pen and paper, for example, without the ease of switching on the television and watching Netflix and being programmed unconsciously. Not that that's bad. I mean, we all like a good movie and stuff like that and a serial, but this is more about your self journey and the conscious nature of it. And one of the poems he wrote was called The Trail. There were plenty he did in that 8 years, and the poem itself is 7,000 lines. And no, I'm not going to recite it to you now, but the point is, he inspired himself to seek meaning in that situation. And he also came to a very similar conclusion to Viktor Frankl, and I mentioned that book in my first episode, that it's kind of war and peace. It's like he was on both sides of that equation, and he realized that, when there's hatred and revenge as a motive, almost like the Cain and Abel story, there's never going to be a good outcome. And he came to the conclusion that compassion's important, but it also doesn't mean that by compassion you give up yourself or you submit to oppression or tyranny, but maybe in the way that you do it, the way that you think and take on life's challenges. So I will give you another really cool poem in the next podcast you might enjoy. But anyway, back to the purpose here. So he basically wrote those 7,000 lines, memorized them in that poem. And what I take out of that is, in those circumstances, how he was able to master himself and find perspective in his own life. And an example I would take from that is the idea that it's a simple, practical example, and it may not be for everybody, but I'll give you the background to it and the thoughts that go with that. The idea is imagining myself in a situation like that without a pen or paper. And so it's like the worst doomsday scenario. No pen or paper, and circumstances seemingly beyond your control. And taking from that, even though I'm not in that situation, I basically memorized, and I've done this for absolute years, one or two things that truly inspire me, poems actually, or even affirmations. We can talk more about affirmations in another video, but a poem basically, and it doesn't need to be so much that you're going to memorize an entire book of poems. Maybe that's my next sort of step, and I try to memorize things that appeal to me. But it's just one poem really that I've been kind of reciting to myself and maybe to others as long as I can remember. It's something I came across in my youth. It's kind of old school. It's not like a classical poem, but it's actually more like a pop culture poem. It comes from a Moody Blues vinyl record called The Threshold of a Dream, if I remember correctly. And the content of that is not dissimilar to what's going on today around this dystopianness and the machine. So there's something that you can do, or you can try. It can be a few lines, 4 or 5 lines. There are pretty short poems out there, something that inspires you. Or it can be like a song, maybe a song that feel something, find something that inspires you, and program yourself with it, and try to essentially change your perspective through that by minimizing the unconscious programming that goes on in terms of this constant cycle of fear and hatred. So here's my poem. Well, it's not my poem, it's the one I do recite. There's a bit of noise up there. Someone's using a catamaran, a bobcat. But anyway, I don't care. I'm going to do it. When the white eagle of the north is flying overhead, and the reds, browns and golds of autumn lie in the gutter dead, remember then the birds of summer, with wings of fire flaying, come to witness spring's new hope, born of leaves decaying. Just as new life will come from death, love will come at leisure. Love of love, love of life, and giving without measure gives in return a wondrous yearn, almost seen. Live hand in hand, and together we'll stand on the threshold of a dream. Enjoy your day. Peace and love.